inside a climate-controlled display case in a quiet South African museum, rests a small, perfectly machined sphere. Geologists date the rock layer it was found in to 2.8 billion years ago. Before complex life, before almost everything, and for a long time, it just sat there. Until one morning, the museum director noticed something that didn't add up. There had been 14 spheres in the sealed case. Now, there were 15. Security footage showed it simply appeared within a single frame. An object that old should not exist, and it certainly should not be replicating itself. To understand how we arrived at this impossible moment, we must rewind. Our journey begins not in a sterile museum, but on a barren hillside in Peru in 2015, with a lone archaeologist, Johnny Isla Cuadrado, lost and about to give up all hope. 3 days. For 3 days, the desert had offered Johnny Isla Cuadrado nothing but heat and a profound, mocking silence. The 1960s photograph in his pack, his only guide, felt less like a map and more like a fated lie. Each stone he turned over, every ridge he crested, revealed only more of the same, an endless jumble of rocks under a punishing sun. The whispers of the locals in Palpa echoed in his mind, their polite dismissals now feeling like prophecies of failure. He was a man of science, an archaeologist, but here, he was just a man chasing a ghost in the shimmering heat, questioning the very ground beneath his feet and his own sanity. He was done. The decision settled not with anger, but with the quiet exhaustion of a depleted hope. But as he stood to leave, a final stubborn flicker of the professional within him refused to be extinguished. As a last resort, a final act of discipline against the chaos, he decided to do the one thing he had left, to map what was there. Not what he hoped was there. He began tracing the arbitrary patterns of stones, his pencil scratching on the paper, a small sound of order in the vast emptiness. And as he traced, a pattern did emerge, a disturbing one, a recurring shape, a detail that made the hairs on his arms stand up despite the heat, a figure, holding what could only be a severed head. It was a grim, unsettling echo of the region's ancient headhunting rituals, a story written in stone he hadn't come looking for. That dark discovery changed everything. He was no longer just looking for a picture, he was on the trail of a forgotten narrative. Driven by this new, unsettling energy, he scrambled up a neighboring hill, his breath coming in ragged bursts. He needed a different perspective. As the afternoon sun began its descent, the light shifted. It was no longer beating down but slicing sideways across the landscape, throwing long, dark fingers of shadow from every rock and crevice. And from that new vantage point, he looked back, and his heart, as he would later recall, almost stopped. All the random, meaningless lines of stones he had been walking through for days suddenly, impossibly, snapped into place. His eyes followed a curve, then a fin, then the unmistakable, massive outline of a body. There, carved into the very skin of the earth, was a 65-meter-long ghost whale, a mythical orca, the divine being of the ancient Paracas culture, swimming in a sea of dust, and in its grasp, a human head. It was all there. This was more than just a discovery. It was a rewriting of history. Soil dating would later confirm it. 200 BC. This silent leviathan was created by the Paracas people, making it centuries older than the world-famous Nazca lines. A far older, far grander tradition of art had been lying here, hidden in plain sight, waiting for one man to nearly lose hope before finding it. A ghost from the past, finally given voice. But for every mystery the earth gives up from beneath a veil of sand, there is another that seems designed from the start to be incomprehensible. What do you do with a secret that isn't hidden, but is instead built into a giant circular wall in the middle of nowhere, with no apparent way in or out. The story of the Orca was found. The story of our next mystery is an enigma that begins where logic ends, at a place called Ksar Dra, the Algerian Sahara in the 1980s. A landscape of absolutes, absolute heat, absolute silence, an ocean of sand, where the waves are dunes that shift over centuries, burying and revealing the secrets of time. For an American research team that ventured deep into this emptiness, they were searching for a legend, a fortress whispered about in old texts, a place called Ksar Dra. After days of navigating the featureless terrain, they saw it, a dark, circular scar on the horizon. As they drew closer, the scale became apparent. It was a massive, perfectly round structure rising from the sand, a silent testament to an immense, forgotten effort. But as they began their survey, excitement quickly gave way to a quiet, creeping confusion. The structure had double walls, a classic feature of a defensive fortress. The team would have expected to find firing slits, arrow loops, any kind of opening to see or repel an attacking force. They walked the entire circumference, their hands brushing against the sun-baked stone. And the chillingly simple fact settled in. There were none. The fortress was blind. It was a shield with no eyes. Perhaps then, it was a barracks, a trading post, a place to shelter people and goods. They found the entrance and stepped inside, into the cool, shadowed interior. And here, the architecture became even more hostile to reason. The internal space was divided into numerous small rooms, but not a single room was connected to another. Each one was an island, isolated, accessible only from the central courtyard. It could not house a garrison, for they could never move within its walls. It could not be a marketplace, for there was no flow. It was a collection of cells, serving no collective purpose. But the final, most baffling discovery came when they looked up. The structure was clearly several stories high. Yet as they scoured every wall, every corner, every inch of the ground floor, they were confronted by the most profound absurdity of all. There were no stairs, no ramps, no ladders, no hint that anyone had ever intended to travel from one floor to another. The upper levels were entirely sealed off, as inaccessible as a locked room with no door. It wasn't a dwelling. It wasn't a prison. It wasn't anything they could name. Every logical function for such a building was systematically, deliberately, negated by its own design. On the fourth day, covered in dust and doubt, a researcher noticed something on an inner wall, a faint scratching, almost lost to time. Carefully, they brushed away the centuries. It was a set of ancient Jewish symbols. Historical records suggested a community had been persecuted in this region in the 15th century. This clue should have been a key, a moment of clarity, but it only served to change the lock. It might explain who was here at some point. It did not explain who built this place, or why they would pour so much effort into designing a building that actively refused to be used. The team eventually left, taking with them not answers, but the heavy weight of a question written in stone. Some places, it seems, are built to deny meaning. They are puzzles that consume all solutions, leaving only a void. The evidence is there, yet it refuses to explain. But what we find in our journey through these mysteries is that for every site that defies purpose, there are others that embody it with a power that is almost overwhelming. We leave the silent, logical paradox of the desert now, and turn our eyes toward a place that wasn't built to confuse, but to clarify. A place designed not to hide, but to connect with the heavens. The year is 1966. The place, the dense, suffocating jungles of Pumapunku, Mexico. An archaeologist, Jack D. Eaton, is leading a team on a routine survey. This is painstaking work. The air is thick, heavy with moisture you can practically drink. The drone of insects is a constant pressure against the ears, and all around is a solid wall of green. For days it's just this, measuring, mapping, and pushing through a landscape that seems determined to swallow everything. Then, they find something. A settlement that is completely absent from any map, any record, a ghost on the landscape. As they explore the lost city, Eaton is drawn to one structure in particular, a large mound found completely consumed by vegetation. There's a strange feeling about it, so the team begins to work, hacking away at the thick green shroud that has held the building captive for centuries. The only sounds are the rhythmic chop of steel against vine and the heavy breathing of the men. It's slow. For hours, it's just a mess of leaves and tangled roots. But then, a strange curve of stone emerges from the green. Then, another. Then, something that looks impossibly like a tooth. A massive, carved stone fang. The pace of the work changes. A quiet urgency takes over. More of the facade is cleared, and suddenly, they are staring into the unmistakable outline of a colossal, unblinking eye. They step back, and as the last of the vines are pulled away, the full image is revealed. Breathtaking and terrifying in its scale. It's not a wall with a door. The entire entrance, the entire face of the building, is the gaping mouth of a monstrous serpent. Stone teeth hang from above. The doorway is its throat. The discovery is so profound, it silences the jungle itself. The team just stands there, staring. To enter this temple was not just to go inside a building, it was to be ritually swallowed, to pass through the jaws of the great sky deity, Itzamna, and leave the ordinary world behind. The architecture is the ritual, a spiritual experience carved from stone. What Eaton had found was Chicana, a name that means the house of the serpent mouth. It is a place built not to be a puzzle, but to be a portal, a direct connection to the cosmic worldview of the Maya. The Maya built this place to commune with their gods, a profound act of creation. But this journey has shown us that the patterns of the past are never so simple. What do we make of a civilization that achieved a similar perfection, but for the opposite purpose? 2,000 years before Chicana was built, on the other side of the world, another culture laid out a perfect city, aligned to the stars with breathtaking precision. And then, they set it on fire, burned it to the ground, and simply walked away. And that city, that perfect, doomed city, was almost submerged by water, erased from memory entirely. The year is 1987. A Soviet dam project is underway in a remote valley in the southern Urals. The waters are scheduled to rise, and with them, whatever secrets the grasslands hold will be lost to the depths forever. But then, two students on a routine aerial survey notice something. Faint outlines. A pattern on the earth that feels too deliberate, too perfect to be natural. A race against the clock begins. Archaeologists rush to the site, and as they dig, they unearth a city that simply should not exist. They call it Arkaim. It's 4,000 years old from the Bronze Age, but its design speaks of a different era entirely. The city is a perfect circle, protected by two massive, concentric defensive walls. Inside, a complex drainage system, a sewer, and an airflow system designed to funnel drafts into the furnaces found inside every single home. This was a city of master metallurgists, centuries ahead of their time. But the true purpose of Arkaim was written in the sky. The entire city is an astronomical observatory. It is aligned to 18 distinct celestial events, the solstices, the equinoxes, the cycles of the moon, with a degree of precision that rivals, and in some cases exceeds, that of Stonehenge. For about 200 years, this civilization thrived in their perfect city. And then, something inexplicable happened. After 2 centuries of brilliance, the entire city was practically abandoned overnight. And before they left, they set fire to it all. They deliberately burned their masterpiece to the ground. Then they just walked away, and they never came back. They built a city more advanced than Stonehenge, and then they burned it to the ground and walked away forever. Why? What could make an entire people destroy their own masterpiece? Let me know your theories below. The silence of the past is deafening, but sometimes it seems to whisper back. Years after the excavation, 2 students, Sasha and Peter, were exploring the ruins. They stepped into one of the ancient stone circles on the quiet steppe, and reality buckled. A dense, unnatural fog suddenly enveloped them, thick and cold. They couldn't see each other, couldn't see anything beyond a few feet. Then came the flashes of light, blinding and without a source. And then the sound. A crowd of overlapping voices, whispering right in their ears. A cacophony of words they couldn't understand, yet felt intimately close. Just as suddenly as it began, it was over. The fog vanished. The sun was shining on the silent plains. They were alone again, hearts pounding, left with a terrifying memory that defies any logical explanation. The mystery of Arkaim is not just buried in the earth. It seems to linger in the air itself. A city that chose to die is one mystery. But what about a place that never stops killing? To find that place, we must travel to 1942, high in the Indian Himalayas, with a British forest officer named H.K. Madwal. He was on patrol at an altitude of over 16,000 feet, where the air is thin and sound doesn't travel. At the edge of a shallow frozen lake named Roopkund, he saw something strange. A scattering of pale, round objects littered the shoreline and lay visible beneath the glacial ice. From a distance, they looked like stones, bleached white by the sun. As he and his team got closer, the shapes began to resolve. That wasn't a rock. It was a human skull. That wasn't a fallen log. It was a femur, resting beside a cage of ribs. What they had stumbled upon was a mass grave, hundreds of human skeletons. But the real shock was not the number. It was the preservation. In the thin, frigid air, many of the bodies still had flesh attached. Hair and fingernails remained intact. The scene was both ancient and horrifically fresh. The first theory was the simplest. A Japanese patrol caught in a blizzard during the war. Or maybe an ancient army, a single column of soldiers who lost their way and succumbed to a single catastrophic event. For decades, that was the story. A tragedy, but a contained one. Then, modern science arrived, and the simple story began to fracture. A groundbreaking DNA study was published in 2019 in the journal Nature Communications. Scientists analyzed the genes of 38 individuals from the lake. The results were not just surprising, they were impossible. These people were not a single group. They didn't even come from the same continent. One cluster of individuals was genetically South Asian, as expected. But another group, separated by centuries, was from the Eastern Mediterranean, possibly from Greece or Crete. People who had no business being in this remote Himalayan pass, thousands of miles from home. And the timeline made even less sense. Radiocarbon dating proved this wasn't a single event. The bodies were deposited at the lake over a period of 1,000 years. The South Asian group died around 800 CE. The Mediterranean group died much later, around 1800 CE. Think about what that means. Different people, from different cultures, separated by a millennium, kept traveling to this exact isolated spot, and dying there. It wasn't one tragedy, it was a pattern. And there is one final, chilling layer. The cause of death. Many of the skulls, regardless of their origin or time period, show the same strange injury. Short, deep compression fractures on the top of the skull. not from a blade or a human weapon, or the wounds are consistent with a powerful blow from directly above. Local legend has always told the story of the goddess Nanda Devi, who, angered by disrespectful pilgrims, struck them down with a divine storm of hailstones, as hard as iron. Science confirms the injury, but it cannot explain the pattern. It cannot explain why people from opposite ends of the world, 1,000 years apart, would journey to this one lake, only to meet the same strangely specific end, as if by appointment. Science, instead of solving the mystery of Skeleton Lake, has only deepened it, confirming a physical truth that aligns with a mythic one. It leaves us with a cold case that spans centuries. When the physical evidence itself becomes a paradox, when the bodies of the dead tell a story that history says cannot be true, then the mystery changes. It's no longer just about what happened at a remote lake. The question becomes far more unsettling. What happens when the official story of our past is directly contradicted by the bones beneath our feet? Sometimes, the contradiction isn't written in bone. It's carved in stone. And it presents a question not of what happened, but of what we are truly capable of seeing. Our first descent is into the forests of New Zealand, to a place called the Kaimanawa Wall. Deep within the trees, the forest floor gives way to something that feels out of place. It's a cliff face, yes, but it appears to be formed from enormous regular blocks. The lines are uncannily straight. The blocks seem to fit together with intention. Standing before it, the intuition is overwhelming. This is a wall. In the 1990s, researcher Barry Brailsford voiced that very thought. He proposed that this was not a natural feature at all, but a 2,000-year-old megalithic wall built by a pre-Maori culture. It was a structure that whispered of human hands, challenging the entire established timeline of settlement in New Zealand. He trusted what he saw. Then, official science delivered its conclusion. In 1996, a geological survey was conducted by Dr. Peter Wood. The finding was firm. The formation is a natural outcrop of 330,000-year-old volcanic rock, known as Rangitaiki ignimbrite. The block-like patterns were simply fractures, joints that formed as the molten rock cooled and contracted. No tool marks were found. No cultural debris. According to the official record, case closed. So, a natural formation. The official story is neat, tidy. But this is where the current shifts, because accepting that explanation is easy. It allows the surface to remain calm. And if you do, you'll miss the stones in Bolivia that are screaming a truth so loudly, they make the silence from the official record feel deliberate. We ascend nearly 13,000 feet to the barren, windswept plains of Pumapunku in Bolivia. Here, scattered across the landscape, are the ruins of a forgotten world. Blocks of andesite and diorite, some weighing over 100 tons, lie toppled like a child's forgotten toys. But look closer. The surfaces are polished to a near-perfect sheen. The inside cuts feature perfectly straight lines and precise 90-degree right angles. The connections are so exact, even today, you cannot slip a piece of paper between the stones. In the early 1900s, an engineer named Arthur Posnansky stood here, and what he felt was not just wonder, but professional shock. He knew what it took to cut stone. He understood physics and engineering, and to him, this wasn't just ancient. It was impossible. This wasn't the work of people with primitive stone and copper tools, which is what mainstream archaeology, dating the site to around 1,300 years ago, proposed. This was machined. Convinced the technology he was witnessing was far too advanced for the accepted timeline, Posnansky spent decades studying the site. Using astronomical alignments, he came to a staggering conclusion. Pumapunku wasn't 1,300 years old. He believed it was 17,000 years old. The port of a lost civilization, destroyed by a cataclysmic flood. His theory is, of course, rejected by academia, but the stones themselves remain. They don't argue. They simply exist, a powerful, silent, physical testament against the official story. The debate between what the eye sees and what the record allows continues to this day, a deep current of doubt running beneath the surface of history. But sometimes, the past doesn't present itself as a debate at all. It's simply larger than the entire frame of our history. For one soldier, in the year 1849, it was an entire metropolis, hiding in plain sight. But that awe, that monumental achievement, it didn't announce itself with thunder. It began as a whisper in the middle of the New Mexico desert. The year is 1849. A U.S. Army lieutenant, a military engineer named James H. Simpson, is concluding a campaign. The air is dry, the landscape is vast and empty. It's routine work. Then, his Navajo guide mentions something offhandedly. Some ancient ruins nearby. A simple detour. A matter of professional curiosity for an engineer. Simpson expected very little. Perhaps some crumbled adobe walls. The quiet ghost of a small village baked into the dust. He and his men diverted from their path, moving toward the dark slash of a canyon in the distance. As they entered its mouth, the world changed. The relentless sun softened. The air grew still. And then he saw it, rising from the canyon floor, stark against the brilliant blue sky, was a wall. But it wasn't a ruin. It was an edifice, 3, then 4 stories high, a silent testament of stone stretching into the distance. This was not a village. It was a city. As Simpson, the engineer, moved closer, his professional training gave way to pure astonishment. He was looking at vast, planned complexes with hundreds of rooms. The masonry was fitted together so perfectly, his report would later note, you couldn't slip a knife blade between the stones. He was standing in a metropolitan center, built with a scale and precision, thought completely impossible for this time, in this place. He recognized its importance immediately. This was a discovery that would rewrite the known history of North America. And so he began the first systematic survey, meticulously mapping and documenting the great houses, introducing this silent wonder to an unsuspecting world. We have seen walls that defy geology, stonework that defies mechanics, and now, a silent city that defies its own timeline. But now, we must return to where we started, to South Africa, and to the object that is 2.8 billion years older than all of them. We have to go back to the spheres that seem to be breaking the rules of reality itself. We have journeyed far. We've stood within the walls of a city that chose to burn rather than be known. And we've looked into the waters of a lake that holds a 1,000-year-old secret of a death that fell from the sky. But throughout this entire exploration, one object has remained, waiting, submerged in the deepest, most inaccessible stratum of the timeline, the one we started with. To understand it, we have to go back to 1973 in a mine in South Africa. We descend 500 feet below the surface, where the air is thick and the only light is the one you bring with you. Here, a miner named Kobus Venttor was working in the oppressive quiet. A quiet broken only by the drip of water and the groan of timber supports. And then, another sound, faint, unnatural, a high-pitched metallic ringing coming from inside the rock itself. He followed the sound, his hand tracing the rough face of the pyrophyllite wall. This rock was ancient, geologically dated to 2.8 billion years old. It was formed in an era before complex life even existed on this planet. Yet, as his hand swept across the stone, he found one spot that felt wrong. It was incredibly smooth, almost glassy to the touch. He took out his tools and began to work, carefully, chipping away at the ancient stone. And from a tomb almost 3 billion years old, he extracted a nearly perfect metal sphere. It was an object of obvious, intelligent design, about an inch in diameter, with 3 perfect parallel grooves etched around its equator. An impossible artifact, discovered in a Precambrian rock layer where no intelligence could have possibly existed. It was the ultimate anomaly, a piece of a puzzle that didn't belong to our world's timeline. Over the years, more spheres were found, and their mystery only deepened. They were sent to labs for analysis, but the results only created more questions. The reports were wildly contradictory. Some labs concluded they were solid metal, others said they were hollow. Geologists tried to explain them away as nodules, natural concretions formed by mineral deposits over millions of years. But the evidence of the spheres themselves quietly refused to cooperate. Natural concretions are not perfectly balanced. They do not have the uniform density required to spin on their axis with such stability. And geology does not engrave itself with perfect parallel lines. But the final act of this mystery doesn't take place in a lab. It takes place in the Klerksdorp Museum, where 14 of the spheres were kept in a sealed glass display case, safe from vibration and interference. It was just a quiet exhibit, until one morning. The museum director and Cobus Ventor, the miner who found the first one, stood before the case. And they did not see 14 spheres. They saw 15. A check of the surveillance footage showed the impossible. There was no break-in, no tampering. The case was never opened. Within a single frame of the recording, a new sphere had simply appeared. The mystery was no longer about an object being out of place. It was about an object that refused to stay in its place. The question changed. It was no longer who made them, but what are they? Are these artifacts alive? A form of life so ancient it predates biology itself? Or are they something else entirely? Watching and waiting from a time before time. The science breaks down here, leaving only the unsettling physical reality. The evidence suggests a technology that behaves like biology, and the depths, as always, keep silent. An artifact that may be alive. A city that committed suicide. We've seen them as isolated anomalies, fragments of a forgotten story. But what if they're not isolated? What if they are the last mountain peaks of a world that has already drowned? We have journeyed together across the quiet surface of the earth, from one silent anomaly to the next, a geoglyph carved for an unseen eye in the sky, stones at Pumapunku, shaped with a precision that defies simple tools. These sites have felt disconnected, like echoes in separate empty rooms. We stand before them, and the silence they keep feels absolute. But what if they are not separate? What if we have been listening to the echoes without understanding the single, vast chamber they all belong to? There is a body of evidence growing with each new deep-sea survey that comes not from archaeology, but from geology. It states a simple fact. After the last ice age, from roughly 20,000 to 6,000 years ago, the melting of colossal ice sheets caused a dramatic rise in global sea levels. Entire landscapes, coastal plains that were fertile, productive, and inhabited, were slowly, inexorably submerged. Geoarchaeologists now estimate that as much as 80% of our potential archaeological record from that time now lies underwater. Pause here for a moment. Let the pressure of that number settle. 80%. It suggests our entire story of human progress, our linear march from caves to cities, is built on just 1/5 of the available evidence. Imagine trying to understand a novel when 4 out of every 5 pages have been torn out and cast into the sea. This vast missing portion is what we can call the Sunken Timeline. It is not just a theory, it is a shadow library. And we have been living in the one surviving chapter, convinced it was the whole story. This is not science fiction. In the North Sea, an entire 8,000-year-old world we now call Doggerland, a land bridge that once connected Britain to continental Europe, lies completely submerged. Sonar maps show its rivers, its lakes, its hillsides, a complete lost landscape. Off the coast of Australia, at a site called Cape Brugheres, researchers have documented over 260 in situ stone tools on surfaces that were once dry land, preserved beneath the waves. The exploration of this sunken timeline forces a fundamental shift in perspective. It suggests that the clues we find on high ground are not the beginning of the story. They may be the end of another one. They are the scattered, inexplicable artifacts left by the survivors who were driven inland, carrying with them only the echoes of a world that was lost to the water. Suddenly, the map changes. The isolated mysteries begin to connect. That Orca geoglyph in Peru is no longer a strange desert drawing. It becomes a coastal marker for a seafaring people. Pumapunku is no longer just an impossible quarry high in the Andes. It becomes a mountaintop citadel, a high-altitude refuge for a civilization whose heartland was drowned. Arkaim's spiral city on the steppe is not an anomaly, but perhaps a celestial map carried inland by a people who once navigated by stars over a now-vanished coastline. They are all outliers, the last remaining peaks of a much larger, interconnected world that was almost entirely erased. This reframes human history. It is no longer a simple, linear march of progress. It becomes a cyclical story, vulnerable to oceanic resets. What the evidence suggests, yet refuses to fully explain, is that we have been here before. Studies of the Isles of Scilly off the English coast show how communities constantly adapted to 12,000 years of flooding. And today, projects like Subnautica are in a race against time, mapping these submerged sites in the North and Baltic Seas before they are erased forever by new construction. What we are finding in the deep is not just our past. It may be a warning for our future, a quiet reminder from the depths that our own coastlines are not permanent. The oceans are the last great unexplored frontier on Earth. If you want to continue this journey into the depths of our hidden history, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. The next discovery is waiting.